When we think about built environment, when we just think about what we like, what we need, and what gets us out and moving around our city, and then we, if we think about, well-cleared sidewalks and lots of great, at-grade commercial space and a lot of activity on our street, and easy to get about, easy to move from home to work, to shop, to whatever you're going to do, the library. When we think about that, when we consider that, and then we overlay that with, someone who may have less mobility, lower income, and what that means and how we can raise everyone up so that in the end we're just all together, right? We all want diversity, we all want to ensure that we have equity, but to do that, we need a good built environment.
That's true. How do you think we could lead as a city, that we could take concrete steps to try to bring that kind of equity through things that the city does, whether that's city sidewalks or city community centers, facilities, things that the city can take charge in and do a demonstration project?
Well, there are a lot of ways we can do it, not without ideas. It's no secret that if you want people to be able to stay in the neighborhood, to be able to visit parks, if they're seniors or if they have young children, for example, having public washrooms available. We know that there have been campaigns. Gotta Go is the one that comes to mind for everyone, and we know that it limits people's mobility and being able to get around. Transit, to have equitable transit. Paraparity is another group and another notion that we always have to be thinking about. Like, why is it easier for me to get around the city than somebody who has mobility challenges? But it is, and we think about our sidewalks and clearing our sidewalks. And as I'm the councillor for the downtown ward, tens of thousands of people walk on the sidewalks in the downtown every single day. Over 80% of people who live and work downtown don't use a car to get to work. They either walk or cycle. And I half-jokingly, tell staff, I'm not really concerned about whether you plow those roads, but I want the sidewalks done, because this is how people move around in the downtown. So if you think about one one movement that may make a real change, I think about gender inequity and that lens that we can put over everything we do in a city, from park space to transit to winter maintenance. What does that mean if you put that lens over it, if you make it more accessible for women, for girls, for people with mobility challenges, then it's better for all of us. And I think that it can be done. I think that you just need to be serious about it and start building your city and start managing your city in a way that brings that parity.
That's very true. And when you talk about, if you make the city, the sidewalks, for example, more safer or better, more accessible for women, you make them safer for everybody.
Absolutely.
I think the same is true when we think about the way we design our streets. If we make them safer for bicycles, we make them safer for everybody.
Absolutely. When we put bike lanes on Laurier Avenue, for example, those bike lanes made everyone safer. It made cyclists safer, so cycling accidents decreased, pedestrian accidents decreased, but so did vehicular. So even if you're in a car, you're safer because everyone is. And I think you said it perfectly. If we raise that bar for people who are more marginalized, we do raise it for everyone. We're all better off. Not just because it makes it easier for us, but we get the advantages, the social advantages, the economic advantages of having everybody move around the city in an equitable way.
Yeah, that's really true. I mean, there's so many studies that talk about how adding bicycle parking and bicycle lanes boosts economic activity. And when you see, a place like Beechwood Village or, Wellington West, and you see the opportunities that are both created and the opportunities that are lost when we don't put in that safe cycling infrastructure. And then I think about something like Lansdowne, where it should have been very safe and very pedestrian oriented, and stores close and they don't survive. And the relationship between the two, I think, is really interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, there's just nothing, if there's nothing to compel you to go and stroll, to cycle through, to enter a space like Lansdowne slowly and take your time and not just move through it,
Right.
Businesses will suffer. We know that. We know that we have to bring people onto our traditional main streets to stay.
A few years ago, the City of Toronto brought in, as part of their site plan bylaw process, that the architect would have to permanently sign the building with a plaque at the main entrance. And that has helped kind of create a bit of a culture of people knowing who the architect of the building is. There's a bit of a name and shame, but there's certainly a sense of pride that comes with that
Absolutely.
Your architect's name is on that building and you're going to be proud of that work, and the world is going to know who does that. Do you think that the public would help the public understand who an architect is and what they do?
Absolutely. I also think it would get us better buildings, I mean, look around us right now. The transformation of the National Arts Center, the light, the space, just traveling through here just now, running into people that and it's transformed it, and that was done by an architect, right? Like that's that type of design that you need. And when we think about development, we always think about who the developer is, but I always get criticized for when a building goes up and the renderings look one way and the finished product looks another way.
Right.
And I say, look, I agree, and the problem is that the developer's allowed to do that. They're allowed to switch out. But if the architect, like you said, had a stamp on that building, I doubt they would allow it to happen. Or so it helps us to, we can't regulate everything. We can't create laws for everything. It's difficult, and it's difficult to compel great builds. But when a reputation for an architect is at stake, or will live on that building, I think we get a better product. I think that we get more pride in the work, and in the end, we know it's the architect that has done the pieces that will make that building work.
It's tough because beauty is a little bit in the eye of the beholder. For me, a building that seamlessly integrates with its community and stands the test of time is what's really important. To
Absolutely.
me, that's a sign of beauty.
Absolutely, yeah. Beauty is subjective. I mean, what one person likes, maybe another doesn't. But when you put it in an entire context and you look at a city skyline, or at a street, or at a neighborhood, or how one building blends with another, people, there are certain looks, or certain designs, or certain ways of doing things that just make people happy.
What's your favorite building in Ottawa?
I love the Shaw Centre. I think it's a spectacular building. I love across the street, 40 Elgin. Like, there are a lot of amazing buildings. The Chateau Laurier, there are just so many. But when I think about a building that has transformed itself, and that went from what we all considered at one time the ugliest building in Ottawa, it was actually elected, people voted on it, that it was the ugliest building in Ottawa. Today it's the coolest space, I think, for a lot of maker space and startups, and it's got a gym in there, it's got a kind of a cool furniture shop, it's got a bakery. And when I look at that building, I think to myself, you know what, it's got this interesting kind of curve to it, it's got this appeal to it, and it's interestingly surrounded by a parking lot because it was built in another era. you can feel this really
Yep.
neat vibe. People want to be there. Lots of really neat stuff happens in that building, and it's become one of my favorites.
Yeah. Just about every building has an architect. You know, there's a handful that don't, right, other than sort of smaller houses. But there's so many buildings that have, you know, that have an architect. And we don't know who the architect is. We don't know anything about them. We don't know anything about the history of them. And it's interesting that when we think about that from a heritage perspective, you know, we might think about, say, Somerset House. We know, we could look it up, there's heritage information, and we know who the original architect was, or how it was developed, or how it was built. We know that sort of story, but the sort of vernacular, or ordinary, everyday stuff, we don't know. We don't know who that is. And we lose that legacy because we don't identify and sort of celebrate that work, not in an egotistical way, but to know who that is. And I think it's interesting, especially when you think about sort of heritage buildings.
Yeah.
You know, what we're building today, what I think of what I'm doing today, I'm building heritage for 7 generations from now. But the stuff that we have today, we really need to take better care of. And I think one of the losses that we have in our communities is when we invest in a piece of infrastructure, community center, and we don't maintain it, and we don't make it sort of part of our community, and it's 40 years later, how could we get new ideas for how to re-inhabit or reuse that space? You know, one option is to hold design competitions, ideas competitions, celebrate, you know, emerging practitioners, just to get ideas for how you could use a space.
Well, that's such a topical question right now. We are in a time where we know we've got a housing crisis, housing emergency, and we know we've got to intensify, we've got to build more stock. And when we think about that, when I talk to people in my community about, you know, taking smaller lots and allowing more units on it, it's the right thing to do, and everybody agrees with that. But what most people are concerned about is the lack of amenity space, the lack of community space that we have in our community. And they say to me, well, that's fine, but you know, we have this small little community center, or this, you know, this other one over here, and yeah, they're falling. They haven't been maintained.
Yeah.
You know, we haven't maintained our assets as a city the way we should. So you know, how do we accommodate 10,000 new neighbors when today we're squeezed for space? And if I think about Dalhousie Community Center, which is just on Somerset, you know, that was a wonderful old heritage building. It's just been sold to the Community Health Center, so it will still get that public use. But it sat half empty for years. Yeah. At the same time as we have a housing crisis. At the same time, and I'm not saying housing would have been the answer for it, maybe not. But, you know, would a small library, would, you know, a small maker space, like what could go into a building like that would provide, and it doesn't all have to be from your local government, right? We can partner, we can find ways of using our space better. And I think we have to, like, as we intensify, and we have to intensify, we can't keep going out. We have to think about our space, our public space, and how we use it better. And absolutely, design competitions, bring in people.
I think it's at the corner of Preston and Somerset. You know, there's like empty corners that probably were gas stations or something, derelict sites that are just sitting there for decade after decade, just vacant. Do you think that there's something the city could do to lead and spur developers, owners of that vacant land, or to just buy up the land and then just build something on it?
Well, certainly there are opportunities. So when I introduced the motion for a housing emergency, one of the things that was approved was, you know, when we are looking at our empty building bylaw, which we'll be doing in 2020, you know, I've asked staff to consider how we can use that to, you know, convert, however we do that, whether it's through us purchasing it, expropriation, but how do we convert empty buildings into housing? And the same is true for empty lots. small little empty lots, can't we, can we purchase them? Can they become little pocket, parks? So that, again, we're able to give people the space they need, while I'm out there saying, we need more people in our neighborhood. And everybody agrees with that. Nobody doesn't agree with that. But what their concern is that we don't have the right type of space. And and that's where architecture comes in. We have to build parks. We don't have a lot of space. How can we build them so that people get what they need? They get a little bit of passive space. They get, I did a survey in the community about 2 years ago around what people are looking for in their parks, and I was surprised that the number one thing that people asked for was space where, small performance space outside.
Right.
People want to be able to sit outside and see small performances.
Right.
So how can we do that? How do we build that into small spaces and the right spaces? We know that we can have large swaths of green space that are never used. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for something that's active and that works.
So something to celebrate the sort of small interstitial space.
Yes, absolutely.
So that it's part of a community.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you very much, Catherine. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, it's been wonderful.
Yeah.
I always, I think that it's important that we keep reminding people of what architecture brings to the table, and I think that it's a conversation we've not had enough of. And as we grow in this city, and as we consider what type of a city we want to become, we want to be an equitable city, we want to be a dense city, we want to be a sustainable city. Architecture plays such a key role in that. So I really appreciate the conversation.
Thanks, and thanks for being a champion.
Absolutely.